Hi, Dr. Egan here. We're still in Chapter 1, talking about the science of psychology, and I wanted to take a moment and just talk about diversity and and point out that diversity is a topic that affects all of us. It's something that we're going to visit throughout the semester and as we understand the different fields of psychology. It's important to be aware of how diverse our society is here, both here in the United States and just looking at the broader world. And oftentimes with diversity comes from people not understanding enough information about another culture or ethnic group, or, not understanding the difference between men and women or young and old. And from that, there can be interpersonal tensions that occur, and, incidents of aggression and prejudice and conflict. And so much of how people view the world is impacted by the stereotypes that we hold. And we're going to talk a lot about stereotypes when we talk about social psychology. But the theme here is that first of all, to be aware of diversity, and second of all, to embrace it and have it be something that we look forward to learning more about versus something that we fear. And we need to think beyond our American experience and look at the human experience as one that surpasses our country. I want to take a moment and just talk about gender briefly. As far as gender, obviously we tend to categorize people as male or female, and which is just consisting of your biological makeup. But we need to look at gender beyond that and look at what goes into what it means to be a particular gender. So the psychological meanings attached, the social meanings attached, what are the stereotypes? If we were in class and we had the opportunity to sort of have a discussion about it, I would ask you about, what are some stereotypes that are aligned with men or being male, and what are stereotypes that align with being female? Um, and I mean, just when I think of conversations that I have with my children who are, I have a 9-year-old boy and an 11-year-old girl, and I think of what my son might believe about, oh, well, pink is a color that girls wear, or boys like sports, or something like that. And how even children who are very young get inundated with these stereotypes and how that shapes our behavior. So being aware of what cultural expectations are regarding what's acceptable behavior, looking at what activities are associated with being male versus female, that's really important when it comes to looking at a diverse experience. It used to be that feminist psychology was a field of psychology that was studied sort of independently, whereas now feminist psychology is influencing all aspects of psychological practice, where there's room for feminism or feminist psychology in all fields and subfields of psychology. There's three main points when it comes to feminist psychology. And the first one is that most research supporting dominant theories are based on all men. So the one that's noted here, the theory of moral development, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about developmental psychology, but when they were talking about how do people develop their moral compass, how do we evolve from a very young age into determining what's right and what's wrong, and how does this change and mature as we age? And the most famous theorist who was responsible for moral development, his name is Kohlberg. His entire theory and study was based on working with men, working with males. And so acknowledging that that's the case in a lot of areas is really important, because having an all-male sample is not necessarily going to elicit results that can encompass the entire population. Number two, reports of gender differences tend to focus on the extremes, exaggerating small differences and ignoring greater similarities. Okay, so what this is that, for example, if they talk about the differences in how men process emotions in a relationship versus women, instead of focusing on the fact that majority of the time it's very nuanced, they might take extreme examples or extreme case studies and use that information and generalize it to women in general or men in general, which is not representing men and women accurately. The third one is the questions that psychologists will ask are what they perceive to be important. So if you have men who are primarily investigating men, then you have these studies who are very geared towards the mindset and the priorities of a man. So looking at it and being able to say, okay, well, the perspective of men versus women may be very different, and we need to study it differently is really important. So a real life example I can give you is that I have a good friend who she's a doctor, she has an MD, and she also has a PhD, and she runs a whole clinic in Minnesota. And a lot of how she manages her job, being a female leader, she's a professor as well as a medical doctor, how she manages, she's very mindful as far as whether she's managing men versus women, the fact that she is a woman and her style and her approach of interacting with people. And just now, in more recent literature, we're learning more about how men and women differ with regard to managerial styles, leadership styles, communication, how well they can encourage people to try something new or communicate. And so if she were to, in her process of becoming a leader in her field, just read studies that have been focused on men, she's not necessarily going to be able to get a broad view of the issues that might be relevant for her as a female leader. In addition to just thinking about gender roles, male versus female, looking at sexual orientation as being an aspect of human diversity is something that is becoming more and more to the forefront. I just want to take a moment and point out some terms that are associated with human diversity: race, ethnicity, and culture. And race is a biological term, and it's nearly impossible to identify biologically separate races. I know recently on Facebook I've seen some of the companies where you can send away, some of your DNA, and they will tell you what your racial makeup is. And sometimes people have relied heavily on, my parents' skin color is white, or my parents are of Asian descent, and so my race is Asian or black or whatever it is. And they and their belief of what their race is has a significant impact on how their identity is formed, their sense of self, how they view the world, and what experiences they might be part of. In contrast, ethnicity is where you're talking about a culture that's shared by a group of individuals. So these might be people who view themselves to have who have a language in common, or who all from a particular area of the world, or all celebrate a certain religion. My husband his ethnicity is Greek, and both of his parents were of Greek descent, as far as he knows, and they grew up in Greece and they came to the United States. And so he speaks Greek, and he was raised in the Greek Orthodox religion. And there's, obviously there's food that's specific to the Greek culture. There's, holidays and different cultural experiences that he identifies with from being Greek. So his race, believe me, I've asked him, his race is that he considers himself to be Caucasian race with Greek ethnicity. And then his cultures, the values and the attitude and the behaviors that are passed from one generation to another in his family, are all these aspects of being from the Greek culture. So within a culture, you can have subcultures. You can have where there's something that distinguishes them from a different subculture. So it could be attitudes about something, it could be behavior, it could be vocabulary or an accent. As far as cultures go, there's a couple different kinds of cultures that we think about, and we're going to mention this. This will come up. The difference between individualistic cultures and collectivist cultures. Individualistic cultures, which is primarily what the majority culture in the United States is cultures that value independence and personal achievement. Okay, so this is, somebody who typically in the United States would be of Caucasian descent and focuses on, personal growth, personal experience, maximizing their life and their goals. A collectivist culture are cultures that value interdependence, like working together, fitting in, having harmony. Oftentimes these are Asian cultures, Hispanic cultures, and there's a lot more focus on the group as a whole versus the individual within that group.